Hello everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at the Tubular quad. Okay, so make sure you guys check out all the previous videos about the tubular quad. That way you guys can understand why I actually designed this thing in the first place and all the revisions that have happened up to this point. However, I will be doing a brief recap of what has happened right now, but make sure you check out that playlist. The link is down in the description. This thing has been in development for over 2 years now. Over 2 years ago, I was flying a 6-inch Alien, and I really liked how 6-inch flew, but there were some design issues I found with the frame itself. So first of all, the Alien frame, it's really durable, but it's also really heavy, so I wanted something that was lighter. It has a really long fuselage, which is good for putting a lot of stuff in it, but that also makes it have bad pitch authority. And that combined with the squashed X configuration where the front motors and back motors are really close to each other really makes that even worse. So I wanted a quad that not only was light but had really good response on all axes. So what I was looking for was something that had some kind of forward to back stretch and had a really tight center of gravity and a horizontal battery and was 6-inch. And at that time, over 2 years ago, there really weren't any frames that met all of those requirements, so I decided just to build my own frame. The reason why the frame has tube arms is just because they're really easy to work with and they're really strong, so they make good arms. So the first version of the tubular quad was rather crude. The arms were just glued together in the middle here between the bottom and the mid plate, and it was pretty light at 80 grams, but it also had a lot of structural issues. So oftentimes the arms would break at the screw joint here or at the motor mount here where the screw holes were. And also the bottom plate would break here. So in the version 2, which you see right here, I beefed up the bottom plate from 1.5 millimeters to 3 millimeters, and the arms were beefed up to 2 millimeters from 1 millimeter, and the nose was also extended just a little bit to get less of the motors and props in view, and the arm mounts were changed from just being glued in to actually being screwed in. So that fixed most of the structural issues. However, now this thing, instead of being 80 grams, weighs 130 grams, which is way too heavy for a frame in my opinion. So my goal with the version 3 was to retain all the strength and good design features of the version 2, but to try to make it lighter again without making it as weak as the version 1. So working from the outside of the quad in, the first thing that has changed are the motor mounts. So from the version 2 and before that, the motor mounts have stayed the same. It's just a flat carbon plate glued on top of the arm. And the problem with that is the epoxy joint there is the only thing holding this plate on. There's no actual carbon taking up any load. So epoxy isn't that strong in comparison to carbons. So the joint will just break off there. And the screws will actually hold the motor in place pretty good, but you don't really want just the screws doing all of the heavy lifting for the motor mount, so that's really not ideal. In addition, the screw holes in the arm cause stress concentrations, which is why on the first version of this quad, the arms would break at the screw hole here. So I've addressed all of these things with the new motor mount design. Now there's still the flat plate that is glued on top of the arm, but now there's carbon toe wrapped around the ends and soaked in epoxy, so there's actual carbon holding the motor mounts on and giving some actual strength to this thing. In addition, the motor screws are now on the sides of the arm, so that gets rid of those screw holes that cause stress concentrations, and the screws are shorter now, which saves weight. Now, since the motor mount screws are gone, I actually thinned the tube back down to 1 millimeter thick up until the center section, where it's still 2 millimeters thick. And how I did that was just glue a smaller tube inside of the larger tube in the middle section. Another thing that's changed is how the arms actually mount. So with the previous version, you know, this thing's been flown for over a year. It's seen a lot of crashes and whatnot. So the arms actually wiggle like this, and that's not good. And part of the reason that happens is because the screws are so close together. So with the version 3, I moved the inner screws even further inwards to make that gap larger so that there are less forces on these screws. In addition, I tried to make all of the ends of the arms touch in the middle, but I think I actually over sanded the arms, so I don't think they're actually touching. But the idea with the arms touching in the middle is that the forces get distributed to the other arms and therefore spread out across all 8 screws instead of just 2. Another problem with the previous arm mounting design was that the vibration isolating standoffs would be used as a structural element. So oftentimes the bottoms of these would strip out because it's just a brass insert and brass isn't that strong. And the inner screws just have these steel nuts plopped on top, and those would tend to come loose and are annoying to tighten. So in the version 3, I've just used what most other companies use, and that is just some threaded inserts that press into the carbon. And I think that's going to work a lot better, and they probably won't come loose. So the next thing that has changed on the version 3 is you can see that the top and bottom plates have cutouts. Now, if you build this thing yourself, you don't have to do these cutouts, but they do save a lot of weight. In addition, the thicknesses of all the carbon pieces have changed all to 2 millimeters thick, because that is just a pretty standard size that I see companies using, so I figure that should be strong enough. In the previous version, the bottom plate was actually 3 millimeters thick, which I think was overkill, and then the mid plate, top plate, and motor mounts were only 1.5 millimeters thick, which is a little bit weak sauce. So now everything is just 2 millimeters thick, which I think is a good in-between, and it allows you to cut all the pieces out of the same piece of carbon. So I think those are all of the design changes for the version 3. Now we can talk about some of the optimizations to the build process that I've made. So if you saw in the montage, all of the drawings I put on the same page and then put them all really close to each other so that I could just print out the one page, glue stick it to the carbon plate, drill all the holes, cut out all the pieces, sand them down, and then once that is done, because I used a glue stick, I can just soak the flat carbon pieces in water, and then the paper will just peel right off because it's glue sticked on with washable glue stick. So I was pretty happy with how that worked. Another optimization that I made was printing out this little arm template. So as you saw in the build montage, this just clamps on to the end of the arm, and then it allows you to drill really precise holes in the end of the arm and sand them down perfectly. So I'm really happy with how this worked. Everything lined up perfectly the first try. Previously, I've had to widen out some of the armholes because it's really hard to drill freehand in rounded carbon like that. So this fixed that issue. So these files will be included with all the other files. So make sure you check that out. Link is in the description below. All the CAD files, drawings, and then the files for this jig as well. Everything you would need to build this at home. So those are all the design changes, build optimizations, and whatnot about this quad. I'm really happy with how this thing came out and how it sits right now. It is 99 grams, including all of the motor screws. So that is over an ounce lighter than the previous version. So I'm really happy about that. I achieved my goal of making this thing lighter. In the next video, I'm going to be throwing the electronics in this thing and we're actually going to fly it. So I'm really excited about that. Make sure you guys get subscribed and turn on notifications so you don't miss that video. And please like this video if you liked it, and thanks for watching.